Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is David Malone.
And my name's Ian Stroud. This is Hyperland.
On the podcast, we've got two former members of the Israeli Armed Forces. One is Yonatan Shapira and the other Jonathan Sugarman, who some of you will know because in the later part of his life, Jonathan also became Ireland's most famous and important whistleblower in the financial crisis. It's safe to say Jonathan has led anything but a quiet life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, both Yonatan and Jonathan, they both grew up in the same Tel Aviv suburb where the higher command of the Israeli armed forces generally live. And when they met each other later in life, when they realized they were both pro-Palestinian activists and had come to some serious questions about Israel's military activities, they suddenly realized they had this background in common. Yonatan became a captain in the Israeli Air Force. He was a Black Hawk pilot. And Jonathan also served in the Israeli military. He programmed missions for F-16 bombing missions. I think it's fair to say they both have been on a long and very difficult journey where they'd come to question what they were perhaps told when they first were called up, and have had to reevaluate what they thought about what they were asked to do. Yonatan, in 2003, famously organized a petition by a big group of pilots who said that we are just not going to kill Palestinians anymore. He's done a lot of other notable things. And Jonathan has been a vociferous and outspoken activist, pro-Palestinian activist certainly for the 20 years I've known him. Thank you both for talking to us this evening, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, do you want to start?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks for Jonathan Sugarman for the introduction. Whenever I will say Jonathan, I actually mean Jonathan, because in Hebrew, that's how our names sound.
Yeah.
So it's basically the same. And I actually knew Jonathan since I was early on in elementary school. His family was quite a prominent one. I remember his father and his brothers in the little synagogue. They were always there, dressed in a very nice suits and praying. And I came from a much less religious family, but nevertheless, I was hanging out there. Yeah, we basically grew up 5 minutes walk from each other. And my mother was the biology teacher of Jonathan. And I even remember that one time I joined them because they were 1 year older than me, his class, and I joined them to this trip in the north. And Jonathan gave me his binocular to watch some birds, and I, by mistake, dropped the case of the binocular to the swamp. So I still owe you a binocular case. I hope one day I can pay it back. But going back to your question, we grew up in an extremely Zionist environment, very militaristic. The neighborhood where we lived was actually built by mostly high commanders in the Israeli Air Force. It's called Ramat HaSharon. It's just 20 minutes from Tel Aviv. Everyone in my school were either sons or daughters or of pilots or navigators, and your status in class was according to the rank of your father. You know, if your father was like a squadron commander like me, you got a little bit more points. But another friend of mine in class, his father was actually the Air Force commander, so I was below him.
Yeah.
So this was kind of the environment where we grew up. And of course, all these ceremonies in the memorial days, in the Holocaust memorial days, we were those kids that read the names of the fallen soldiers. I was also a musician, so I used to play all these sad songs and and stand next to those, with a fire where it burns for the whole night and day with all the names of the fallen soldiers. So I think both of us really grew up in the heart of the hardcore Zionist militaristic. Today I would call it a sect.
Yeah.
But, that was our religion in a way. Secular, mostly, for me at least, mostly secular Jewish values, but ardent Zionism with a very complete narrative of the history that is totally neglecting anything that has to do with Palestinians. I didn't know the word Nakba until many, many decades later. We didn't learn.
Tell us what Nakba means for those who don't know.
Nakba is the Arabic term for the catastrophe that happened to the Palestinians in 1948 when Israel was established. The war that we grew up as the War of Independence was actually the Nakba of the Palestinians, where around 500 villages and towns were destroyed, and 700,000-800,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes. And the country that we grew up in was established. Most of the towns and cities are sitting on the remains of demolished villages. Sometimes the houses are still there and they were taken and turned into houses for Jewish families. But all this thing was totally neglected from our childhood. And therefore, I grew up with the belief that I'm going to be the best soldier in the Israeli military. I didn't have any doubt that I need to join the military. My only doubt was whether I should go and serve in the Air Force, like my father. He was a fighter pilot and a squadron commander. Or I will go to serve in the Sayeret Matkal, which is the most elite commando unit, like my elder brother that was already a soldier there. So no doubts whether to go to the military, but just where I can excel more, where I can be the best soldier and later commander. And if there are problems, because we were kind of Zionist lefties, socialists, wanting peace and all this kind of talk, at least. So if there are some problems here and there, we will fix it by climbing as high as possible in the military and fixing the problems from inside. And that's how I joined. It was 1990 1991 when I joined the Israeli Air Force.
Jonathan, is that largely the same for you, or?
Largely the same for me. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me along to this chat as well. I'd only add to Jonathan's description of background by saying that in the case of my home and my upbringing, we were definitely not secular. And Jonathan remembers me from the synagogue because we attended the synagogue religiously on a Friday evening and a Saturday. So the Zionism that I grew up with was a very right-wing Zionism and very much tied in to all of our religious practices. So when we blessed the wine and blessed the bread on a Friday night around the family dining table, we would also it's a standard prayer to welcome the Sabbath, and you thank God for having chosen us, the Jewish people, as His people, etc., etc. So, in a way, it was a double whammy. It wasn't just everything Jonathan described. On top of it, it was a very heavy religious mindset.
It sounds as if it was very certain for both of you.
And reading out the names of fallen soldiers, and some of them were the fathers of kids in our school, in our class, going back to Jonathan's rating reference, and if your father had been killed in a war, then you are certainly a hero. You know, it's to a certain extent, it's obscene, actually. I mean, we're all 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, and yet we're all so aware of, you know, what has your family done to save this country and build this country, etc., etc. And in my family, it's laden with the content of the Bible. So, you know, Moses was there, and then he came along, and then there was King David, and etc., etc. And on the eve of the fast that we have during the summer to commemorate the destruction of, I think it's the first temple, I hope I'm not wrong, my father would get us kids in the car and we'd drive to Jerusalem to the Wailing Wall at 1 o'clock in the morning and say our prayers and make sure we fasted the whole way. So it was all, there was nothing light about any of this. And then these ceremonies that Jonathan speak of were then compounded, obviously, by everything to do with the Holocaust. So every year around Holocaust Memorial Day, we would still be of a generation who had grandparents, some of us, with numbers that were tattooed in concentration camps.
How was the Holocaust tied into the sort of the ongoing militarism, though? Did those two things just sort of coexist, or were they brought into intimate contact?
Well, it's not very fashionable to say so anymore, not even within Zionism. But there was a sentiment, and of course, by the 70s and 80s, when we grew up, people pretended that never happened, of, in a way, the Jews of Europe were at fault because they weren't strong and muscly and fighters, and we were going to be the opposite.
I can add that for me, from a very early age, I remember maybe even second grade, you know, I was 7 years old. I felt that I know about the Holocaust and I have the responsibility to grow up and tell it to the next generations. Yeah. Sometimes I felt that the kids in my class are not aware enough of what happened. And therefore, my responsibility as a good student that listened to the teacher, and I grew up with this admiration both to my parents and to my teachers and to the whole system. And I felt that it's my responsibility. Me, Jonathan, I have to hold this tradition and this story of what happened to our people in the Holocaust. And therefore, when in, I think it was 11th grade, when we were like 16, 17, we went to this trip with a school to Poland to, 1 week with 5 concentration camps. And my job was, as the klezmer, the musician, I had to play the same Holocaust songs in every ceremony that we did, in each one of the, Majdanek, Auschwitz and everything. And I remember that I think in Majdanek, as a child, we were standing there and doing one of the ceremonies. And I remember the piles of shoes, looking at that. And then there is like a big pile of ashes that we know that it's from the crematoriums. And I was standing there and feeling this huge, enormous sense of pride that my father is a tough, strong squadron commander in the Israeli Air Force, and I'm going to follow him and become a defender of Israel, of the Jewish people, so the Holocaust will never happen again. And on top of all this, my name, Jonathan, is actually named after Jente, my grandfather's mother that was killed in Treblinka in Poland. So it was like I was marinated in this Holocaust upbringing very deeply.
It was all the horror of the Holocaust, and then because of the religious background I grew up in, we had to go through the scroll that describes Jerusalem being besieged. The scroll is called the Scroll of Eicha, and it describes how people ended up eating human flesh in order to resist. But it was all so, we've fought for hundreds and, thousands of years at this stage to be Jews and it was now our duty to be strong and powerful and make sure that nobody besieges us again and nobody sends us to any more concentration camps. The whole narrative to do with, for example, geography, there's some dispute about whether or not Golda Meir, Israel's first and only female prime minister, said, "We were a people with no land that came to a land with no people." Now, she might have said it, she might have not, but that was definitely the spirit within which we were taught geography. And I remember being in second grade, having been taught about how we, the Zionists, dried the swamps north of the Sea of Galilee, and that one of the heroes of that period had said on his deathbed, "It is good to die for our country." And then I was assigned, together with a couple of other kids, to make this enormous poster for one of the walls of the classroom in bright red, saying, "It is good to die for your country, for our country." And this is at 6 and 7 years old.
Wow.
I honestly have to say that it was some kind of a fantasy to die for your country. I remember watching these programs on TV about the fallen soldiers from 48 and others. And I remember watching this guy that died, and the whole program was about him and how he was such a determined and dedicated commander in the Palmach, and that in the holidays he would get his violin from the bag and play to everyone and be the center of the feasts and stuff. And I remember thinking, oh, he also played the violin, I'm also playing the violin, I can just die and be like him. Or it was like total identification with the country and with those heroes. But nevertheless, at least for me, it was very, very happy upbringing. It wasn't something sad. It was like full of meaning, full of stories, of history, of traditions, of friendship, of excitement and admiration. But it wasn't necessarily for me. It wasn't sad at all. I was really happy and proud. And I remember that I knew that there are some problems in the country, because I was brought to be kind of the Labour Party style politics, my mother at least. And I knew that Israel is a great democracy, not like all the other countries around. And if I want to fix those problems here and there, I need to be, as high as possible in the system. But I do remember, in fourth grade, I was 10 years old, and we learned in the Bible class about the Israelites coming from Egypt and conquering Canaan, conquering Palestine, and how they had to fight and kill and take over. And I remember that suddenly it felt a little strange, and I had this strange feeling, and I decided just to ask the teacher about it. And I kind of prepared this question in advance, and I said, okay, tomorrow in Bible class I will ask this question. I think it's a smart one. Let's see what will she say. And I raised my hand, and she said, yes, Jonathan, what do you want to ask? And I asked, how is it possible that they just come and take over the land from all those different nations that live there and kill them and kill the animals and all these horror stories. What kind of rights do they have to do that? And I felt kind of smart and, to challenge her. And then she looked at me, and she was a secular Jewish Israeli woman, married to one of the highest commanders in the Israeli Air Force. And she thought about it for a second, and she said, well, in the Bible, according to the Bible, all the land belongs to God, and God decided to give it to the Israelites. And it was such a short and clear-cut answer. And I was just shocked and not satisfied by that's how the story ended. That's how this question ended. And the next time I think about this question will be when I'm 27 years old, starting to realize that I'm part of a terrorist organization and starting to think of maybe doing something else.
Okay, well, let's jump to that. I mean, you said it was all very happy. Did that happiness continue as you began your national service?
So for me, I decided to try to go to the pilot course in the Air Force, and I was very happy that I managed to pass the test. And it was really my dream. Like, it was something that I really wanted with every bit of my heart. I was a bit disappointed when in the middle I was shifted from a fighter jet pilot to a helicopter pilot. But then I became a rescue pilot that fly those Bell helicopters, later on Black Hawks and stuff. And in a way it suited me very, very perfectly, because I was always this kind of vegetarian, pro-peace, lefty guy. At least in my own view, that's how I perceive myself. So I thought, okay, my job will be to bring people to the hospital, to risk my life, to rescue people, to fly those special forces into enemy territories. And it was quite an exciting service, I have to say. The removal between my actual job to the job of my friends and other pilots in other squadrons, where I didn't have to actually drop any bomb or shoot anyone, made it easier for me to tell myself the story that I just described.
Yeah.
That I'm a good guy. I rescue the life of people. I sometimes bring special forces because they have to come and do something important. That was the story I told myself. And slowly, like a big wall,
Crumbled.
Cracks came about, and at some point it all collapsed in a very, very, very in a kind of a mental crisis, that like everything shattered. Like I couldn't take it anymore.
Was that the same for you as well, Jonathan?
I suppose the same, but somewhat different insofar as a tremendous sense of duty and destiny. It all tied in. So whether it was the Bible lessons of our forefathers, to the prayers over the wine and the bread, and thanking God for choosing us over other people, a typical Israeli boy of our age would have his life planned out until the age of 21. 21 is the first time you actually get to think of what it is you want to do with your life, because you go from high school straight into the military service. The alternative is jail, because it's conscription. Maybe some of the listeners wouldn't be aware of the fact that the conscription is for both men and women. So there was no room for any doubt or any second thought. In fact, I'd hurt my back during the basic training, and at a later stage was discharged from the army on the proviso that if my back improved, I'd be called back in for service. unless I chose to volunteer just so that I could continue my 3-year service, which is what I chose to do. And some of that choice was because I didn't want to be seen on the streets of our suburb, because all of the kids of our age were in uniform and doing their duty.
Yeah.
So I would have been ashamed being seen going to the cinema in the middle of the week, sort of thing.
So what did you end up doing, Jonathan?
I spent most of my 3 years positioned in a F-16 bombing, an F-16 squadron whose main mission was bombing. My daily role would entail receiving instructions from Air Force High Command as to what the targets were that we were to attack. And we would pull out the relevant maps and start calculating speeds, altitudes, directions, while someone else calculated full fuel consumption and what type of bombs were assigned by the Air Force chiefs to be loaded onto these planes. And every pilot before leaving the squadron would be given a disk from me that would then be loaded onto the F-16's computer. And together with an information pack that included satellite images of the targets. And we speak as the genocide in Gaza continues. These information packs that I would hand out to each and every pilot would include satellite images of neighborhoods, of public buildings, anything really. And I was the one who did the calculations of how many seconds do you fly in which direction and when do you drop the bomb. And they would say things as they were walking out, and I'd hand them each their disk. They'd say, well, if I get shot down by an anti-missile aircraft, that's your fault. So, age 19, 20, I'd have a young pilot of 28, 29 years old who would say, well, if I don't come back, you'll tell my children why I didn't come back. So, my concern was for the welfare of this hero, not for the welfare of the innocent people he was about to kill. I saw them as targets on an American satellite image of this neighborhood, of this encampment or whatever it was. And then when every pilot returned, he would give me a video cassette, which would have recorded the entire flight. And then for the next day's debriefing, I would have edited everybody's flight footage, where I would show how heroically each and every one of our pilots bombed the different places.
As Jonathan was sort of saying, that he got to a stage where he was hit with a crumbling wall. When do you think the same thing occurred to you? That
it sounds prosaic, but it's true. Probably 7 or 8 years after I'd left the army, sitting in a pub in Dublin, and someone said to me, so what did you do in the army? And something clicked, until then somehow, in a very strange way, in my mind, I had never made the connection between all these targets I'd marked off a satellite image and what the footage looked like on CNN the next day.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, that sounds really stupid, but I didn't realize the connection between the two. And that was, and I remember sitting in in a group of people, and a good few guys older than me said, well, I wish our kids would go to the army. It would teach them some discipline. And, don't you think so? Didn't it do you good? And I just froze. I just froze. I had never, somehow I'd managed never to connect the two.
So, Jonathan, how did that affect you when, again, with the crumbling wall?
It is a long story, and this story has marks of different points where now I can set some kind of example of how the process happened, but it was a gradual process of me opening my eyes. I can give you some anecdotes. I don't think I can tell it thoroughly because it's just it's a life story of several years, mostly of the second Intifada, 2000, 2001, 2002, that happened parallel to me hearing stories from my brothers that were ground soldiers telling me what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank, and me slowly realizing what's going on around me. One story, I was chosen to be taken to this, to be one of the pilots that will be like this team that will go to the United States and get special training on Black Hawk helicopters in a U.S. Army base somewhere in Alabama, and then come back to Israel and to my squadron and help teach the other pilots on these new helicopters that Israel got from the U.S. And somehow the guy that I mostly was friend with and felt something in common was this German pilot that was also in some training course there. His name was Hulger, and we became good friends, listening to music together, sitting in the evenings in the barracks of the officers in the base there in Alabama, and I guess we had a lot in common. It was nice and easy, and one night he felt comfortable enough to tell me about his grandfather. And he was saying that his grandfather was a commander of a big brigade, I think, in the Wehrmacht in the Second World War. And he inherited all his journal or his diary from the war. And it was books and books and books. And I guess he recently got them and he read everything. And for me as a Jew, with all the Holocaust thing that we just talked about, I was mesmerized and listened to him eagerly. And he described how his grandfather was very much against the Nazis. From the diary, from everything he wrote, he was really, really against the Nazis. He thought that they are bad, they are stupid, they are bad for Germany, bad for the world. But nevertheless, he didn't have a choice because he was in his position in the Wehrmacht. Of course, when I heard Hulger defending his grandfather, saying that he didn't have a choice, I said, what do you mean? He was supposed to refuse. He was supposed to refuse to be part of this horrific crime that the Nazis did.
Yeah.
What do you mean he didn't have a choice? And Hulger was a bit puzzled in the beginning, and then he said, if he did something against, the military, it would put in risk him, his life, and the life of all his brigade. He just didn't have a choice. And I kept on going and describing how, maybe his grandfather was the one that came into the village of my grandparents and whatever, and killed all their family. And it became very, very, very high tension, and I was very angry and upset, and it went on and on and on, me demanding that he will say that his grandfather should have refused, and he's saying that he didn't have a choice. And then at some point, Urgel said, yeah, but what about you? Didn't you hear about this helicopter that shot a missile into this bus and killed the 5 Palestinian students next to somewhere in the West Bank? And I said, what? I was shocked that he dared to even mention, Israel in this context,
Yeah.
I was shocked that he even dared to think that he will now pose this question to me. How dare you, even talk to me, you, German, grandson of a Nazi Wehrmacht guy, how dare you? And I was so upset. And I said, you never, ever, ever dare to compare. And what's happening in Israel is totally different. And I am against occupation, I'm against the settlements, and I'm all for peace, but Israel is doing everything they can. And then, of course, I said the most important sentence: the Israeli military and the Israeli Air Force is the most moral military in the world. That's what I said, and I shouted it, of course. But I ended this fight, with saying, when I go back after we finish the course, if I find out that the Air Force in which I serve in proudly is on purpose killing civilians, if it's not true, it doesn't happen at all, I can guarantee you, but if I find out in the future that the Air Force I serve in is killing civilians on purpose, I will not be like your grandfather, and I will refuse. I finished the course. I came back to Israel, and I found out that I have to refuse. And I used to say that, I made a promise to a grandson of a Nazi commander that if I find out that the Air Force in which I serve in is killing civilians on purpose, I will not be like this Nazi commander who hated the Nazis. Many other things happen along this time. But that was one of these things that when I started finding out about all these bombardments that my friend in other squadrons were doing, and how actually there was no other way to look at it but killing civilians when you know in advance that you're going to kill them. I didn't have any choice.
Well, those same squadrons that Jonathan speaks of and I was part of, the pilot's progress within the ranks depended on how well he performed in these bombing missions. So it was a matter of pride of, look how well I got the mission accomplished. And that's how these pilots, who when I think of today as basically children in their late 20s, become deputy squadron commanders, and they think they're God, and they're flying jets, which once they're laden with weapons are worth about $60 million a piece. So they think themselves as demigods, I suppose.
Yeah.
The video I edited for the morning debriefing was for everybody to clap on each other's shoulders and say, well done, you bombed the living daylights out of them, you got it right. Or maybe you didn't get it right and you should do better. So not much room for humanity in all of it, or second thoughts.
And at that time, Jonathan, you make, when you first told the story, you make it sound as if during that time you really didn't have second thoughts. You weren't saying, "Hey, we're bombing people." That somehow you'd managed to seal that away in a separate part of your mind, and that you really didn't. That the connection wasn't made until that night in Ireland. Was it as clean cut as that for you, or looking back?
Completely. So I remember the exact pub in Dublin where it happened, and being unable to move or speak or just frozen, utterly frozen. But again, going with this line which Israel is using yet again during this genocide, we are the army, the military with the highest morals in the world. You know, we wouldn't hurt a child, and we wouldn't, you know, these are unintended casualties. These are unintended. Well, if you're going to blow up an entire neighborhood in the middle of the night, guess what? There will be women and children sleeping there. But we grow up with such, and this is where I use the word religious again, such a religious conviction. I did have cousins who lived in the settlements, in the illegal settlements on the West Bank. It was all about us Jews reoccupying our forefathers' land 2,000 years later. We'd come home and we were not giving up our home, and we were going to be the top professionals at what we do. They held these high moral values that Jonathan speaks of. So how could I possibly doubt that this is a legitimate target? It never occurred to me that, you know, the next day there would be a headline like there was today about deputy head of Hamas being killed in Beirut.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the fact that an entire neighborhood might have been murdered along while this went on. Sorry, this is a bit difficult for me. You know, it would be in the news the next day saying, "Oh, so-and-so, head of so-and-so Palestinian resistance movement has been killed in a brilliant Air Force operation by our great forces last night." You know, there was I part of this great operation.
We can say that it's exactly like today. They would say, in order to kill one of the high commanders of the Israeli Air Force that lived where both of us grew up, they took down this neighborhood. So basically, what we are trying to say, that we are realizing that these justifications are justifications to take down our childhood neighborhood, because all our fathers and our neighbors were high commanders. And according to these practices of the Israeli Air Force, we were all a legitimate collateral damage. And to think about the headquarters of the Israeli military and the Israeli Air Force being in the heart of Tel Aviv, about 100 meters from the biggest hospital of Tel Aviv, Ichilot, all surrounded by civilians. Every time now, during this genocide, we hear those justifications of the Israeli spokesperson. Mm-hmm. What they say in different words is that they legitimizing killing all our families.
Jonathan, are you saying that in some way when Hamas or somebody sends a rocket over and it lands in and it doesn't hit the house of one of the commanders of Israel's military, but lands nearby and kills someone else, they could justify it in the same way, saying, well, you know, unfortunately there's collateral damage when we're trying to target the real mouth.
They can use the same argument. I can just give one specific example of a bombardment that was in the summer in 2002. The Israeli Air Force sent an F-16 fighter jet with a pilot and navigator in the middle of the night to target the house of Salah Shahade, who was the head of the armed part of Hamas. They killed him with a 1-ton bomb dropped from an F-16 together with 15 other people. He didn't just kill these 15 people and 9 children, and including a baby in his mother's womb. The next day, the Air Force commander said that it was done in a perfectly way, and it was within the moral envelope or something like that of the Israeli army. And he even said that the pilots that did it and all the pilots of the Air Force should sleep well at night. And I think for me, and maybe a few others that I later managed to convince them to join me in this petition, it was like the last piece of puzzle that comes down from the sky, and then you see the picture.
Yeah.
And I saw it as a terror attack against all these babies and children. And in a way, I felt that this Zionist boy, this Jonathan, the Zionist boy that stand in those ceremonies and went to these places in Poland and was proud to be the Zionist boy, died there in this hole, in this bombardment.
Yeah.
And will never wake up again.
Is it right to sort of say that you've both had quite a sort of epiphany at that point?
I think it was kind of an epiphany, but because it was built of many other pieces of events and moments, yeah, it was one of them. And I remember just a few days after or a few weeks after, there was an officer in one of these squadrons, probably in the same role that Jonathan had,
yeah,
who refused to pass the maps and information to the pilots. And it became well known everywhere. And it was talking about on the news, on the army radio. I don't know how they didn't censor it, but it was well known that there was an officer that was supposed to deliver the maps and the information for those fighter pilots before they go to murder these kids. He refused to give them the maps and was, I think, kicked out from the military or was punished by going to jail or something like that. And when I heard it, it was one of these moments that I realized, yeah, that's what we have to do.
Stop. Yeah.
Even if it's not me, even if I just prepare those maps, even if I, as a rescue pilot, just stand by to rescue this pilot when he go to bomb these civilians, even I'm just in my reserve duty and I'm not even serving there, I have a role. And that moment where I realized that this joy of flying this big Black Hawk helicopter machine, it's so exciting. It gives you this huge, omnipotent, how do you say it? Omnipotent feeling. Yeah. This moment of taking off in a field full of flowers that you can see that everything is just like laying sideways and you're just going up vertically to the sky. This joy, this feeling of power that you have on your left hand when you pull this collective, this stick in the helicopter, that gives you this enormous sense of mighty power. And to connect this to the other feelings of being disgusted by what the organization that I'm serving is doing, and realizing that my joy is connected to the murdering, to terror attacks against civilians, was the hardest part. Realizing that only if I find the courage to refuse to do that, only then I can actually do something in order to affect this ongoing madness.
But it's not just...
For me, that was the hardest part.
Yeah, it's not just stopping and not handing over those details. It's kind of the picture you've painted is, I suppose, the culture of the military, of getting as high as you can within the Air Force or in the Army, and that is a status. It's actually turning around and sort of saying that's wrong.
Yes.
So the kids that
It's
are covered...
First of all, you have to refuse to be part of a terrorist action, terrorist organization, terroristic system.
Yeah.
Only then come and speak and protest and go to politics or whatever you want. But the first step is to stop being part of a communal gang rape or a communal terror practices or communal genocide.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
This slogan of never again, one of the things that I find so horrific is that ultimately the education system that we came out of, be it our formal schooling or the upbringing at home that we received, was the Holocaust in particular should never happen again to us.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't anything to do with man's inhumanity to man. It was all about us Jews.
You were sort of saying earlier that you were seen as weak, and therefore the defense of that has become as aggressive as you can become.
It's more than that, Ian. It's we are superior.
Right, okay.
And we walk around with this feeling of superiority. And so, by what we've described right now, you can understand that we both come from a pretty comfortable middle-class upbringing. And I remember my mother saying once that she was toying with the idea that perhaps we should move to go and live in Jerusalem. And I said to my mom, well, where would we go and live in Jerusalem? Jerusalem is a magnificent city of thousands of years. And she said, I'd love to have one of those old Arab houses. But there was never a discussion of how come the Arabs are not living there?
Yeah.
There was never, I never heard the word Nakba until I was well and truly ensconced in my Irish life.
Yeah.
I could tell you everything about, not everything, but a lot about the Shoah, the Holocaust, the gas chambers, but it took me years to realize that, this was a flippant comment my mother made about, I'd love one of those big Arab houses.
Yeah.
There was no discussion about there are people with keys to those houses living in refugee camps less than an hour's drive away with no water and no electricity. They didn't just pack up and leave.
Given what's going on now, where have you got to in this long journey that you've both been on? How do you see what's going on in Israel and Gaza now?
It's the ultimate. It's an understatement to say that it's a moral bankruptcy of Zionism. I grew up in a very right-wing home where my mom is South African. South Africa's apartheid was not condemned but applauded. And so was Zionism and its efforts to build our Jewish homeland. What we are witnessing now is the absolute collapse of an ideology called Zionism that was racist to begin with. And one of the things we are taught is it's for the grace of King George V, who gave us a homeland because we were being persecuted everywhere. and combined with this other saying of we were a people with no land that came to a land with no people, what we're witnessing now was the inevitable result. And the reason I agreed, because this is not an easy conversation for me to have, the reason I agreed to have this conversation is because I have no doubt that although the technology must have changed since I did my programming, they're no longer using rulers and pencils to calculate out directions. But ultimately, as we speak, there are Jonathans and Jonathans doing the very same thing all over again.
Yeah.
On a massive scale. And I'm not saying this in my defense, because I'm not quite sure I have a defense, but later on, it was like, how did nobody say no? How did I remember the boycott of South Africa, which ultimately led to the collapse of apartheid. How come there was no boycott of Israel?
I think in your defense, Jonathan, it is the activity that you've been pursuing, and the same with you, Jonathan, with the flotillas that you've been doing around Gaza.
In relation to that, one of the flotillas Jonathan was involved with, there was a Holocaust survivor on board one of those ships. The irony of a Holocaust survivor being arrested by the Israeli Navy for trying to bring in food and medicine to the ghetto of Gaza is just, where do you go from there?
Irony.
Jonathan?
I guess it's obvious for everyone to the point I want to make, but still everything that we were just describing to you, it's like little drops compared to the full-scale genocide of Gaza now.
Mm-hmm.
And the ethnic cleansing that happened in the West Bank. We are so far away from the level of killing and crimes that brought both of us to be what we are now, that I just don't know how to wrap my mind around that thing. That is the things that affected me and made me decide to refuse and to organize this group of pilots that will refuse 20 years ago are just like nothing compared to the thousands and thousands and thousands of children that are now dead and thousands of families laying under the rubbles and hospitals that are bombed and the world that is totally silent. It just like your mind just doesn't know how to sustain it. And I remember in the last years I tried to keep ongoing communication with everyone in the Israeli society that is willing to be in contact with me.
Yeah.
Although I was labeled as a traitor in some places, in some other places it was just, radical lefty. In some places they said that I had some mental problem. But I try to keep in touch with whoever is willing because of my fantasy or wish that I can still affect people, that I can still help people realize what Jonathan and me realized, that I can still affect the situation and be in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and not just find solutions for my own self. But I remember how I tried to explain it to some of these people that do not share our convictions in Israel. And I said that, I feel that I understand how the Holocaust happen, how it was possible to massacre and to burn so many of our people. Now I know it's possible. It's so possible, and majority of people will let it happen. And now, as we speak, they let it happen, and it's never gonna be the same. Nothing is going to be the same. There is no way back now, and what we were arguing all these years on different solutions and different perspectives and different ways, nothing will ever be the same after this kind of genocide. Not just with the fact that Israel is committing a genocide, but also the fact that this genocide is being televised or seen all the time through all these platforms, and still those who enable that, those who finance it, those who legitimize it, are still there, letting it happen and supporting it. And
supporting it in silence as well.
Yeah, even I am now speaking to you from Norway. I live in Norway now.
Mm-hmm.
Norway has this image or self-image. They like to see themselves as a peaceful, loving country. The Nobel Peace Prize is given maybe 10 minutes on the bicycle from where I live now.
Yeah.
And they give money to all these NGOs and always want to be in the middle of negotiations and peace talk and stuff. Norway is actually producing those parts of those F-35 fighter jets of Lockheed Martin, the American weapon company, that are, as we speak, killing children in Gaza by a state-owned weapon company. There is numerous of Norwegian state-owned weapon companies that are, through loopholes and through the United States, of course, sending weapon now to Israel.
Can I ask you both a question? You've been on this journey. Each of you have described the moments when you suddenly saw that what you'd been taught as children wasn't true. And the things you saw were there for other people to see. So how have they not seen it? Is it a personal thing? I mean, is it that the journey you've been on is just so personally destructive? Because, I mean, you and I, Jonathan, have been friends for a long time, and I know this is that on a personal level, this has torn up your life in significant ways. Do people not want to take this journey for those reasons, because it's just so unpleasant, or do they not want to take those reasons for more social reasons, that they just don't want to challenge the story that makes them comfortable? When you try to talk to people and they don't agree, what goes through your mind so
how on earth
you understand them not agreeing with you?
It would be fair to say that I was practically disowned by my family for my pro-Palestinian activism, but it took me a while to realize that if they were to stop for a minute and think of what it is that we're doing, they would be in the same moral conundrum of how on earth did I go and commit these atrocities? In the name of what? Something called the Bible that says this is my land and not your land, and therefore I can bomb a kindergarten.
I want to say something about that. There are actually many people like us. Of course, we are a minority of the minority, but there are thousands of soldiers, of Israelis in different positions, in different background, and level academia, arts, military veterans that realized and got to the same conclusions. Some of them made big fuss about it. Some of them left the country and disappeared. What official Israel did with that is to try to silence it, minimize it, and label it as anti-Semite or self-haters or crazy. And treason.
Yeah.
But there were many groups of Israelis that since 48 tried to shout and deliver this message. But obviously we were not successful. Maybe we managed to inspire a few people here and there. Maybe we managed to encourage and show solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. Maybe we managed to help a little bit organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace in America that are doing amazing work, but overall we failed. We failed big time. I personally was fascinated about this question of why it happened to me and not to Uri. Uri, my friend that I grew up with, who chose different. So I actually wrote a thesis in my university studies, and I took these cases of those friends of mine whom I didn't manage to pull to my side and convince to sign this petition and stop their service. And I tried together at the time when we were still in communication, together with them to try to come to the deep, to those places where what was the difference between us. And there were many different answers, but I think the bottom line is the inability to see yourself in the other.
Yeah. Empathy.
And to feel empathy. And one of the things that I remember the most is about this Uri, whom I hope that one day will be in jail when this genocide is over.
Mm-hmm.
I remember asking him, what do you feel when you go to the squadron and get a mission and go bomb someone? And he said that the word chemla, I think it's compassion in English.
Compassion.
Compassion is something that I put in my locker when I change clothes and go on, wear my flight suit.
Yeah.
And then I become part of the machine, and I have to believe in the system and do whatever I am asked. And then at the end of the day, I take it again. And it's what enabled every Nazi, every American killer, every Israeli killer, and even every Hamas militant that killed civilians to differentiate between, hugging his baby before he goes to work and killing another child.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you wanted to say something?
Yes, that there's an Israeli rite of passage almost by which Israelis, in particularly men rather than women, but women as well, that practically as soon as they know when their departure date is from the army, from military service, they've booked a one-way ticket either to India or to Latin America. And so it's like, oh, well, just get away from it all and But there are no statistics about how many people either commit suicide on these journeys or never come back because they just...
There were pilots who committed suicide. I know of some case.
You make it sound as if you're King Canute trying to stop the tide coming in and it's an impossible task. But there are younger people coming through now that are refusing to join up. Is that not a seed at least? Does that give you some hope in what you're doing?
Given everything that has transpired from the 7th of October this year,
Yeah,
it's far too little and far too late.
Yes, you both said that nothing will be the same, that there's no turning back. Do you is that just despair speaking, or when you step back from it, do you really think that's true? I mean, do you think that the present government of Israel is leading its people into a place where the state of Israel as it currently is just can't survive, either morally or physically? I don't know which.
As far as I'm concerned, the state of Israel has no right to exist in its current form.
But in its current form, okay.
And until there's, as a South African citizen, I was there for dinner table conversations about there cannot be a South Africa without apartheid. And thank God for people like Nelson Mandela. Not saying South Africa is perfect, but when I see the South African rugby team made up of a multitude of backgrounds, I think to myself, God, I would have been present at so many conversations as a teenager, as a child in South Africa, of over my dead body, would there be anyone other than whites in the Springboks team?
Yeah.
Well, to hear that very team sing the national anthem in Zulu, in Afrikaans, and in English, I ideally wish I could tell you that within our generation, within our lifetime, there will be such a change, such an incredibly 180-degree change in Israeli society that will accept that the other is not the other, that the only way for us to live peacefully is by giving equal rights to all of its population. And I don't think that the Jewish population of the state of Israel is remotely close to that realization. I mean, you still have people talking about a two-stage solution. It's a joke. Oh, how? I mean, neither Jonathan nor I have family going back as far as Palestinians living or having just been killed in Gaza who can prove that they've lived in Jerusalem for 20 generations.
Yeah.
And until we acknowledge the fact that they are our equals and they have every right to live in Jerusalem and Jaffa and wherever they choose in this little piece of land, there is no hope.
Jonathan?
What do you think?
Going back to what you were mentioning, those young people who refuse to enlist to the Israeli military and choose to go to jail, it always encourages me and it always gives me hope. And in a way, I dedicated all the last 20 years to mobilize kids like them to do what what these heroes in my eyes are doing.
Yeah.
In the last years, I've been doing also parallel to my hardcore activism, going on these boats to try to break the blockades on Gaza and stuff like that. I did also different kind of activism, like music concerts where I tell my story and I sing songs and I kind of try to softly touch the hearts of people and convince them or affect them to re-question, their narrative and their convictions. And when few people are making this choice, it's very important for me, even if everything else in the reality is very sad and gloomy. But when it comes to the actual future of this land, I am sad to say that I just can't see any legitimacy to the current structure of the fascist and apartheid and genocidal state of Israel to exist in that way. I'm not saying that all these millions of people have no rights to live there and to be safe and secure. I'm just saying the structure of the Israeli Zionist state that got this carte blanche from the world to wipe and totally destroy Gaza and kill those thousands and thousands and thousands of civilians and children. This is an entity that has lost its legitimacy and has to be replaced with something else. I don't know to give solutions now. I know that it will have to be by pressure from outside.
Yeah.
And I don't see this pressure coming, and it's not a very interesting maybe subject in this point, but this is my despair in this moment.
Jonathan, you said that that the rest of the world gave Israel carte blanche. I mean, there's so much discussion about, are the Israelis wrong? Are the Palestinians wrong? And but the discussion never turns back to the rest of the world. As you say, why has the rest of the world given Israel a carte blanche? Because we're trying to exercise our guilt for what happened in World War II. That somehow Europe and America are saying, yeah, we somehow let this happen, or we knew that it was going on, and we didn't exactly. Maybe people feel that somehow there's a guilt, and they're trying to get the Palestinians to be the sacrificial lambs to expurgate our guilt. I mean, how else do you
I think,
why has Europe not said anything?
I think a lot of that is what you just mentioned, but the other side of it is pure financial, military, arm trade and other interests. This world, this capitalistic structure of the world, with the US at the moment as the superpower and all the changes happening, I think that's what sets the tone. And there is a lot of financial war going on in the background of this specific thing, and we cannot ignore it. So I think it's a combination of that. And I can just add one thing, like I'm just thinking about a country like Germany, that is one of the maybe most supporters of this genocide. In that case, yes, it's a combination of this guilt of the Holocaust that they committed, but it's also I recognize here maybe the same kind of racism that enabled Germany to support the genocide of Jews and Gypsies and all the victims in the Second World War, that is now supporting the genocide in Gaza. They just shift from supporting the killing of Jews to supporting the killing of Palestinians.
If I may bring in something to do with my banking past, I was working for a German bank at the time of the Second Gulf War, and Germany was very vociferous about the fact that it would not take part in this war that hadn't been sanctioned by the UN, and was basically, the UK and America going in after Saddam Hussein and with no mandate from the UN. So, as always, Germany took the moral high ground of no, we won't be part of this. But the German subsidiary that I worked for in Dublin happily financed the war effort. And when I saw the tickets coming through and who were the companies that we were financing, I thought a lot of, am I the only person who recognizes these names? Or
maybe mention them. It will be interesting.
not now. I've made enough enemies for the moment, thank you.
I was going to ask you a question. I don't know if it's a misplaced question or if you could go home, we want to. It's a horrible thing not to be able to go home, and both of you were in some sense exiled. Jonathan, you have been. Jonathan's told me, when you were taken off flotilla, you were tortured. So you can't go home. But if somehow you could make Israel back to something you could live in, would you want to go home? Do you miss it?
It's not accurate that I was, I was shot in my heart with a taser gun. It was really not nice, but but when you say that I was tortured, I'm thinking about people that stay in jail for a long time and being tortured, and I am extremely, extremely privileged. In all the times that I've been arrested, whether it's in the West Bank or on those 4 attempts to break the blockade on Gaza, it was not nice, but I always knew that there are tons of lawyers in Israel and outside that are going to take care of me. And I'm not going to be one of those who disappear, or even those Turk activists on the Mavi Marmara that were shot on point blank in the middle of their forehead. So I have to emphasize that, with all the sacrifice that some people will say that I did, I had, it's really the sacrifice of a very, very privileged white Israeli Jew ex-officer, even not like Jonathan, with a family that supported me in a way. So it's, I don't know why, but it's important for me to kind of set it clear. The other thing about, I was not forced to live in exile. The circumstances brought me to this position. I was fired from all the helicopter companies. I worked as a civilian, so it became not easy to live there. And with my partner at the time, we didn't have much choice, and we moved outside. I always wanted to go back. I always wanted to be part of the struggle inside and to live together with my Palestinians and Israeli activist friends. The community there that I was part of and I'm still feeling part of is in a way my identity. Mm-hmm. It's my point of reference, my Palestinian friends living there and my Israeli friends who didn't turn around like many others in the last few months, but those who still stick to our beliefs are the core of my new identity in the last 20 years, and it's what kept me kept my soul integrated, what made me possible to go through sometimes tough times and deal with accusations and other things, but not feel alone.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to go back and to be there, and whatever I do from outside to do from inside. But I have to say that after the last after this genocide, something that I never felt before happened, and mostly seeing close friends that were, I thought, to be part of our camp, our equal rights, one state, right of return, supporting all the Palestinian struggle, and being in full solidarity. Seeing some of these people, many of these people, turning around, broke something deep in my sense of belief or hope.
Yeah.
And there is still a hope exists. Go back home, and I cannot totally say that it doesn't exist, but I understand today in my mind that it cannot happen. It's something there is so deeply broken.
My last visit to Israel was over 15 years ago. I was scheduled to stay there for 2 weeks. I left after 5 days.
I think both of your stories have certainly touched my heart. I don't know about you, David. And going forward, Jonathan, apart from buying a new binoculars case for Jonathan, what is the next step for you both?
I think, poetically, maybe it's for a reason that I lost this binocular case, because both of us, in a way, in some strange course of action, our life story brought us to
the same vision,
to find this ability to open our eyes and to look through the binocular and see the reality in which we grew up in.
Yeah.
And this binocular case that is now somewhere deep in the swamp in Ahula Valley in the Galilee, north of the Sea of Galilee, is maybe waiting to be found, but we have to change things from the very, very basic before
at a very fundamental level.
I have to say, in a more optimistic way, if it's possible, that some Palestinian, not even friends, but just friends of friends or people that reached out through different channels, contacted me in the last weeks, reacting to some interviews and videos that were shared in different places, and said that it gave them a lot of hope.
Yeah.
And, maybe you talk now.
I highly recommend reading Ilan Pappé's book about the ethnic cleansing of Israel. Ilan Pappé is currently a professor at Exeter University, and I also recommend reading a book by also a South African born but grew up in England, a woman by the name of Susan Nathan and she titled her book The Other Side of Israel. And she, after she went through a divorce in London and the kids were grown up, and she decided to go and fulfill the Zionist dream. And her book is a very candid description of the horrors she experienced when she realized what real Israel is about.
Yeah. I mean, listening to you both, the thought I come away with is what you went through it's left its mark upon both of you. I've known Jonathan a long time, so I know that on the basis of many, many, many long conversations. And I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but I think I see the same marks upon you, Jonathan. And I can't help but sort of, fear, I suppose, is the right word, that there'll be people just like you starting down that path. And that's
inevitable.
The state of Israel is not only murdering Palestinian children, it's murdering the child.
It's chewing up and spitting its own.
Yeah.
There's no winning of that, is there?
No.
There's no part of that in which anyone wins anything.
I think if you want one image that can symbolize the path of the state of Israel, is these 3 abducted, kidnapped Israelis that somehow managed to escape and were found somewhere in the rebels in one of the neighborhoods in Gaza. They wrote Hatzilu, help, in Hebrew. Yeah. They made signs that they wrote with food remains saying, we are 3 kidnapped, please save us, don't shoot. They went outside. 2 of them were immediately shot to death while they have stripped down to their underwear to show the soldiers that have nothing in their hands. One of them managed to escape to one of the buildings, and for 15 minutes, a brigade commander or something like that, an Israeli commander, was trying to convince him, the last one of these 3, to come out, promising that they will not shoot him. And then eventually he came out, and 2 other soldiers immediately shot him to death. This Israel, this is the state of Israel now, shooting and killing thousands of Palestinian civilians and its own people.
I think the point David was making, Jonathan, is that it is inevitable that with everything that is going on at the moment, there are young Jonathans who are facilitating this genocide, who will end with PTSD as I have, and with the difficulties you have had to deal with. And that's, is there a league of victims? I mean, my heart goes out to 1 million people ordered to evacuate in 24 hours from their own land. But at the same time, this is being done by 19 and 20-year-olds who think they have a right to do this. And God help them the day they realize what they've done.
Yeah.
Listen, we made you relive all of this for 2 solid hours. And although people listening are only going to hear your voices, I've been seeing your faces, and you'd have to be made of stone not to see the effort that you've both gone through to talk to us. And I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Huge admiration.
Free Palestine. This is why we are here.
Yeah.
We want to free Palestine and free the Israelis of being murderers and free everyone there.
Well said. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you.